Two, one.
Hello.
Welcome to the Doing Good show. Actually, I still need to hit record. No, I've hit record. I'm just kidding. It's just like, we've been gassed. I've been hit my second record because I think it's important that we capture every single moment of every delightful word.
Wow, we're ready.
We are so ready. Today is a beautiful day, and we have a beautiful guest.
Thank you.
Here for it. Oh, pleasure. It's a delight, honestly. So this is my guest, Kirsty. She is head of organizational development. Is that correct?
That is correct.
At Southwark Council, which, for those of you who are from the American context, council is the local government, effectively. And Southwark Council is part of the Greater London region, and makes up actually a very substantial borough, actually. So it's quite massive. Tell us about you. Tell us what's your days and lives, and what's going on in your world these days in organizational development, and maybe explain what organizational development is.
Thanks, Andrew. Yes, that would be a good start because people always say, what is organisational development? It depends who you ask that question, which is an interesting quirk of OD, as I will refer to it, because organisational development is so long. But basically, I like to categorise it as being the kind of like driving force for making change in the organization, and kind of thinking about what's the future of the organization, what's the vision, where are we going, and how do we kind of like create that change and like enable people in the organization to help to deliver that vision future down the line. And that can come in like lots of different ways, hence the broad nature of it. But sometimes it comes through kind of the cultural change, values and behaviors. Sometimes it comes through leadership and working with them. Sometimes it comes through like staff engagement. Sometimes it's more the design world and that kind of organizational design and thinking about systems thinking and what does that look like. And then sometimes it's training and development and all those things. But the thing about organizational development is it can be bits of any of those depending on what the organization really needs at the time.
And I think that's very helpful for people to understand, because like fundamentally at its core, it's about changing an organization and in a direction.
Yeah.
And I think the way you described it, you kind of emphasize that there's so many complexities to that, right? It's not a one size fits all. You could tell people how to change, right? Because I think we all have friends who have been like, I think that person's bad for you. And then you tell them this. And they're like, I'm not going to accept that advice. And that's change.
Would they ever?
I mean, it's just like, who's going to make change, right? And so I think most people don't think of change in public sector and government. They don't think very positively of it.
No, they don't.
So you must have a very difficult job.
I love my job, but
Wonderful.
It's actually, I think that's really interesting, and I think there's lots of different categorizations of like generally government, local government, and there's kind of lots of perceptions there. And often, if you talk in the kind of British English context about like local government, people will just look at you and kind of say, "Oh, the bins, oh, the potholes," that kind of thing, and that is what it's almost known for, but it's so much more than that. There's like all the things that we do supporting like young people and their development. Lots of schools are actually in local gov, but generally housing, obviously a massive issue in England at the moment, and across other parts of the world too, but a really big issue that affects people all the time. Adult social care, not the most glamorous, but really important, and how that's handled can impact different kind of lives. And as we kind of go through different elections and that kind of thing, we're seeing the kind of different responsibilities of local government shift and change, but it can impact so much about people's lives that they don't even really think about.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. I think a lot of people don't realize how integral like public services are to just the operation. I mean, like hell, right now we're going through the tubes. We just finished the tube strike here in London, right?
Yeah.
And public transport crippled this city, other than the amount of people probably getting crippled by Lime bikes, which is probably really real this week.
Did you see them all going down?
It's just so crazy what people are doing these days. And I think, just like this basic interaction of like public transport services, I heard it like a couple months back, Birmingham was going through a bin strike, right? And the trash was just heaped up everywhere. And this is modern England, right? Like, not expecting like waste to be just piled up everywhere. Like,
no.
So it's key. I mean, like beyond just trash, right? Obviously.
Yeah, of course. And actually, that's made me think about the fact that even like as you go out into London, like the way London looks, so much of that is like in the local government space. You know, how does the city look? What does it feel like?
Yeah.
And like, you know, all the different kind of green spaces. Do you love your local park? Most people do, you know, and especially in big cities really value that. And they're all things that are kind of incorporated into local government's world, and kind of, you know, even that talking back to central government and, you know, advocating for people, lots of that sits in the government's world too. So I think that it touches the lives of people every day, whether or not they know it. But there's definitely a kind of, you know, if you think of like Maslow's hierarchy, I think of this in terms of like different services, and like, you know, you've got the kind of broad at the bottom, the day-to-day ones where lots of people will be impacted by the government won't know it. And then you've got like the people who are more vulnerable, who need local government support more urgently. And like that intervention there and that prevention there is what stops people from getting into like that top part of the triangle, where they have to, you know, where they might end up like in the NHS, or like, you know, with police, or going into kind of like homelessness. And, you know, I really see our job as supporting the people in the broader sense there, but like that prevention aspect there is just so crucial, because that's what stops people from really stepping into like the next steps.
Need bucket.
Yeah, exactly.
That's an interesting insight, because, you know, I think people don't realize that there is this like, I don't want to say, how do I frame this? So like when you're thinking about climbing this pyramid, I love that analogy, because I think you don't want people using more services in a way, because that means that potentially people are not well, right?
Yeah.
It means that they are not having vibrant lives. It means that they've got to rely on more services, and things are really disconnected. In other words, you're trying to build this foundation for people so that the public services deliver the value and the basis for people to have good lives.
Yeah.
Just like, you know, almost like the dream state is, you don't necessarily need to interact with your local council in that dream world. I obviously want them to engage positively in participatory democracy and etc. Right? But we don't want them to rely on those services. We want them to be free of it and not have to need them. Right?
Exactly. And I almost think of it, if like local gov is doing like a really good job of it and all those things, people almost don't really, you know,
think about it.
Yeah, they go into their park and they're like, this is a lovely experience, this is so nice. And or you know, it's because you're absolutely right, like that prevention part is where it's kind of really key. How we do prevention in local government is what can really influence you know, how many people do move between the different kind of pyramids. And if we get that section right, that's where I think local governments can be at its most powerful.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. I want that, right? Because I think it just means that like people are really living their best life.
We say their best lives in the best borough in the best city.
Oh, whoa, okay.
I know.
I don't live in Southwark, so I'm not sure that I can be on that team. Sorry, I'm not sorry.
Terrible.
The place to be.
Exactly.
Apparently, though, Tower Hamlets is very much like all of London's best bits in one borough. So that's actually our slogan out here in Tower Hamlets.
That's a bold claim.
Yeah, I agree.
Not the wars of the boroughs.
I agree.
But I appreciate the vision. That's the important
lovely
thing.
You guys are really shooting for this.
Yeah, you know, go for it.
Be the best you can.
Exactly, that's what we should be saying.
So, what motivated you to be in local government? What motivated you to kind of focus in on change management? Because, you know, most people, I think, they think change management, they just think, oh, that's actually just what you should do every day. You know, like, so how did you get started in this, and why?
Good question. I think I had that classic experience when I was in uni. Everyone around me was like looking at private sector grad schemes, all those kind of things. And I even admittedly did a few kind of like days in like different corporate law firms and all those things. And the thing that I really enjoyed about kind of going through that experience was the kind of problem solving and like the taking something here and how do you make it better and like what's good about it. And like I really like looking for like what's good, but then where are the kind of things that could be tweaked to make it even better, and like including like people's voice in that. And like as I was going through thinking about what I wanted to do, I saw an advert come up for like the local government grad scheme, and it said, you know, this is about changing people's lives. And I was like, that's what I've been missing. I was like, you know, I'm so interested in, you know, too, in the innovation and like, you know, how do we make things better? But like for me, the thing that's like so key that like gets me out of bed is like that social part, like the, how can we change things to make it better for people? And I guess that was what really kind of brought me into the sector and encouraged me to kind of go into it. I don't have one of those stories where I was like, oh, I've been, I've had lots and lots of time with my local council growing up. No, I was one of those people who, for me, it was kind of, it was a service that ran quite smoothly, and that was kind of that. But certainly that kind of captured my imagination of that. How can this is somewhere that you can change people's lives, and that was what made me be like, that feels like it's the right place for me.
That's cool.
Yeah, so that's how it started.
I was kind of hoping that you had an origin story, maybe walked into like a bin man saving you from something. I've saved you, Kirsty. Don't worry. It's like a little Kirsty.
You know what? I need to work on my storytelling. I'm sure I can find something somewhere.
I am sure I can twist it.
If I like look back through my life, maybe I can pick something out to be like, that was the key defining moment. Although I have to say, the first time I voted, I was like, wow, what an experience.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Wow, what an experience.
Democracy in action.
Wow, I feel so empowered. Hey, that's great. That's wonderful. Not enough people feel that way, right?
I know. This is why I still love elections now and like working on them. But yeah, I suppose that was it. That could have been a moment.
No, that's so cool, because I think, people don't appreciate like how simple and rewarding some motivations can be. Like, you don't have to make it like this super dramatic thing, or it doesn't have to be saved by a bin man. It doesn't have to be like, oh my God, the council really transformed my experience. You just want to find something rewarding and meaningful at the end of the day where you can say, I enjoy that. I want to focus in on that one word you said earlier. You said innovation, right? Making, fixing, and changing problems, right? Just little things, right?
Yeah.
And I think people really underplay like how important it is to make those changes, and that is actually innovation, right? People only associate innovation with like, I've just invented ChatGPT 6. Like,
yeah,
that's great. That's wonderful. I'm very happy for you, right? But there's so many things that are like really manual tasks, like, and really like, just processes that need to be fixed in this world. So like, tell me, like, give me an example, like something that you've like worked on that you found, like, I guess, fascinating within the public sector around organizational development, and like what kind of change and maybe some of the frustrations you had in that process, because I think people don't appreciate like what change management is like, and there's so many stakeholders, especially for public sector work, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think before I give you an example, I think you're exactly right, Andrew, about like the innovation. It is something that people use, and especially now, it feels like now it's more of a buzzword than it was before, and people bandy it around and they're like, oh, we need to innovate, and I kind of want to sit them down and be like, okay, slow down. I'm glad that you're excited about it. We love excitement, we love enthusiasm, but it's certainly that like sometimes the systems work quite well, sometimes, and then it's just bits of changing and like exploring a bit more of like resident voice that can bring that in, that can make something really different. Sometimes you do have to break it apart and start again. That's just the nature of the system.
Yeah.
But I think the nuance is understanding when that is the case. Something that I've been working on fairly recently that I think is really exciting because it's not done. I haven't really seen it done before in local government. We have like a People Power Innovation Fund.
Okay.
And what that is it's basically, we're really interested in, like I was talking about, prevention and kind of like, and linked into that kind of co-production and co-design and really bringing resident voice at the heart of what we do. And like the campaign that we've kind of run through Southwark that I feel really strongly about is our like People Power campaign, and we say we're powered by people, and it's all about really bringing that to life and bringing resident experience to life and bringing staff voice into it, so that we're really co-designing and creating together. So this is one of the things that we've been doing kind of within that, and we basically opened up this fund, and we got staff from across the organisation. Didn't matter what level you are, didn't matter if you've done project work before or not, doesn't matter who you are. We gave them the opportunity to apply for this fund where they see things that don't work as well. We gave them the opportunity to bid for some money to kind of fix that with resident voice at the heart of it, which is super cool. And I think it's been a really interesting process. We've actually ended up funding 10 projects. We had we had about 35 apply, which is really good, from across the organisation. But we've got people doing it who've never done a project before. We've got people doing it who know a bit more about that. But it's all about creating a culture of co-design and resident voice. And like, if any of those kind of more, talking about innovation, some of the things that people are doing within that, they're like, they're not like breaking things apart and doing it again, but it's where they've seen things that don't work so well for residents. And if we changed our way of working and they needed a little bit of funding they couldn't otherwise get to do that, it'll have an impact, or I hope that's the idea, an impact on residents, and kind of then taking that and building it into our business as usual. So how can we really do that?
See, that's fascinating, because I think, some people be like, well, it should just be that way anyway. And you're like, hold on now, right? Like, a lot of people don't understand that when you're running a big ship, right? A council, local government is a big ship, right? You can't just go in and willy-nilly change things just because you think they're good, right? I'm like, it'd be a good idea. Because then you end up with this giant, cobbled together, crazy looking boat, right? Just imagine every single part of the boat was made by the person who works there, and then suddenly you're like, does that work well for the whole ship?
Yeah.
Not necessarily, right?
Yeah.
And I think this is where like bureaucracy, scale, and like innovation come in, right? Because you want to innovate and make change, and like the people who are closest to it, like, obviously you know it better. But at the same time, you still have to make the boat flow, because just because like they're like, I'm going to drill a hole here because it'll be way better. That might be a leak, right? That might be a leak for the boat, right?
Exactly.
And that's the part people just keep forgetting about, like change, right? Is because I hear some people like, that's just stupid. Government should be like this. And you're like, I mean, I don't think anybody disagrees, right?
Exactly.
It's just, it's not so easy to make that change, right? Because there's a lot of bodies in the mix, right? And then if you get something wrong,
I mean, that is exactly it. The thing is, about local government is we are there to serve residents. That is our purpose. And like I was saying before about like the vulnerable group of people, often when you're doing innovations, it can be in that space. So it's just thinking about the fact that, if you're changing something, what is the impact going to be on them? Because you might think, oh, we're just going to have this output, we're going to change this X, Y, Z, but like the actual outcomes and what that can lead to. So I think that bigger picture is really important. And I think something that is sometimes done really well in local government, but other times not so well. It's like the kind of
hold up our hands, we'll accept it.
I always accept it. I love local government, but I would never say that we've got everything right all the time.
Yeah, good. I think plenty will agree.
It's like that kind of that systems mapping, and that like putting, that journey mapping of like where the kind of different pressure points are. And I've seen some really interesting work about that before, where we've mapped out like residents' journeys with like housing services over like 20-25 years, and like you can bring some of that thinking into it. But I think a really powerful piece in local government that could be done when you're thinking about change and like not impact, like, the longer term picture of it and all those things, is the kind of more qualitative research aspect, and that really kind of like talking to people and understanding.
How dare you? Please, we only talk to the GPT. We don't talk to people anymore.
How could we ever?
Yeah, seriously.
But like, what is your experience like? And understanding people's stories and where their frustration are, and then using that information to inform how we work and where we change the systems, and where are the systems that really need changing, rather than kind of sitting in an office looking at it being like, oh well, maybe if we
let's fix that problem over there.
That one over there, let's like switch that up. Because sometimes I'm always surprised when I talk to residents, or I see feedback from residents, and I'm, the things that matter to them aren't necessarily the things that me sitting in, in kind of my world would do. And I think that also kind of feeding into that is the fact that often staff who work in those more front line roles, they really get that. And like, for me, they're such an important resource to my thinking and like kind of the design of the organisation, because they're the people who work with residents every day. They understand the systems much better than I do, and kind of ensuring that they're included in that kind of like thought process and how we move forward as an organisation is really always really key in my thinking. How do we capture their thinking and like feed that into our general systems thinking, our culture and our values?
This is a really interesting point because it reminds me. So once upon a time, I used to work at a telephone company, right? And I used to work like in a customer service, like basic kind of
Oh,
like go
yeah.
out fix things.
Yeah.
And then after I did that job, I ended up back in the corporate tower, right? And you're like, okay, good for you, Andrew, right? But one of the things that everyone always said was the frontline customer or the frontline experience is so different from what the corporate experience is, right? In terms of like what you try to solve for the customer, right?
Yeah.
And I think it reminds me of what you're describing here about the frontline workers who interact with the residents, and then where do you think we go wrong? Like what happens in between that frontline experience and then the office experience? What happens in that journey that makes us forget? Right? Or maybe it's not forget. Maybe it's why do we focus maybe on the wrong thing? What happens in that journey that makes us, I guess, not remember what they care about, right? Because I don't think people are ignoring residents, right?
No.
I think you're the most thoughtful, empathetic person when it comes to like making sure you can deliver for your people, right? But there is a distance, right? So what happens there? What do you think happens there?
I think that's a really interesting question, and actually, you focused in on one of the things that I'm most passionate about, which is bringing, frontline staff's voice and resident voice into like general ways of working. But I do think you're absolutely right, and it is a challenge in local government, and I think part of it is because, in terms of like staff, like the business as usual work of staff is very, very busy and local gov. Like, say for example, if you're a social worker, often you'll see X amount of people in a day. You'll be back to back. You'll be journeying around the borough. You're kind of like you're working with residents and all like those kind of things. I'll give you another example. If you're one of our like street cleaners, you're going to be you start your shift at like 6 a.m. sometimes 7 a.m. You're out on the streets all day. You kind of going about your role, like talking to residents, capturing that information, etc., etc. Where is the space within that business as usual and the busyness to kind of feed back that information for other people to kind of capture it, or B, to have any opportunity to do any kind of thinking space or like kind of more like imaginative work about the future? And I think that that's something that then kind of can lead to some of that kind of tension and barriers, because say for example, if you want to really capture those staff's voices in what you're doing and their experiences, you have to work around the kind of the business as usual and their shift patterns and like their like what that looks like. And you obviously we're there to serve residents, so if you're taking people out of their day-to-day job to get them to help with that thinking piece, it has to be really valuable, and you have to make sure you're getting the right things out of it, because you're taking them away from a service the services that residents want to do. And I think that there's always a tension, and that's something that I work through quite a lot, is that how do we kind of get more voices into what we're doing without compromising on kind of services and create that space for thinking. And that's something that is part of my role to help kind of to do that and to make that happen.
Yeah, that's really cool, because I think about it, and you're absolutely right. Like we all focus in on like short-term KPIs, or like how much trash did you pick up? How many bins are sorted? How many streets are cleaned, right? And that seems like an intuitively right thing to say, like let's get rid of the trash. Like, okay, cool.
Yeah.
But then when you do that, you force people into becoming these drones, right? Which just pick up trash. And you're like, okay, that's great, right? And then we start saying, don't talk about like your stuff, don't share that information and suggest improvements, right? Because we all get stuck in this kind of like, here's your job, just do it, right? That's and I see that in so many organizations, right? That's not just a public sector thing. You see that in private sector corporations, third sector, all of it, right?
I agree, but then I think that there are ways in which you can go about like creating that space. But I think that's where like that senior leadership buy-in has to really come in, because it is a challenge to get people involved in like the thinking and all those things. And I'd never say it's not, but if you have the senior leadership buy-in and the will to like create that time for staff to be able to do that, that does help in order to kind of ensure that's the case. And I think that it's really, as we like in local government there are lots of challenges, and like I think the challenges are going to get worse in lots of different kind of ways, and that upskilling of staff piece and giving them an opportunity to kind of feed back in and to be able to think a bit more strategically is really important. And it was something that I think shout out to the work in Camden where they're like thinking about imagination activism, and like Phoebe who kind of like Phoebe Tickle who like leads on that and like that way of thinking.
I actually know her.
Do you? Yeah. Phoebe's great. I love Phoebe.
That's crazy. I didn't know she was. That's crazy.
She's been doing some work with them, and I think it's so interesting what they've kind of been doing there. And when I was there, I was kind of working on some of it as well. But they've had their kind of CMT and senior leadership really commit to this idea that for us to like drive where we want to be in the future, there has to be kind of collective imagination of like what that vision is, and that includes like residents, it includes staff. So in order to do that effectively, you have to create space for people to be able to think, and like they're really kind of committing to people having that space and time to think. And like I've taken some of that learning, and we've been trying to do some of that in Silk. So say for example, we've really been kind of designing what our values and culture are going to be moving forwards. And during that piece I had like over 800 staff involved in it that I individually spoke to, and like that included like lots of workshops with like our frontline staff, because it was really important to me to give them some space to do that. But you have to be able to work in a collaborative way and like understand that for them this is a whole different way of thinking. They might not be exposed to that on a day-to-day basis. So how do you get the best insights out of them and make sure that you are using their time effectively? Because it is time that's not, where they're not out and about with residents. Yet at the same time, if you don't get their insights and if you don't get the richness of their understanding, you won't be able to create something as good or something that will serve residents so well. So I think in kind of that local authority world, we always have a balance of being like, we're here to serve residents, that's absolutely paramount. But how do we make sure when we're thinking about the long term rather than the business as usual, we're really including all the people who know that best without being at a kind of detriment at all to services that residents are experiencing on a day-to-day basis? And I do think that's a challenge.
Such a big ask. I'm not trying to be like difficult, right? Because I just
Here
think, like I want it, right? I want it, and I think it can be done. I guess where I'm really worried is that like I think about the leadership requirement, like the quotient that's needed for a good leader to imagine that, right? And so I want to ask you, like I know that there's this huge component, the leadership buy-in. People have to care. People have to convey that message.
Yes.
Let me ask you the opposite. When things are bad, right, and leadership doesn't have buy-in and you don't have collective vision, how do you start that, right? Because I think more people work in organizations where they're not fired up by the vision, the direction, the leadership. How do you initiate change, or do you just abandon a ship? Right? Hey, you gotta ask the question, right? It happens, right? Sometimes you leave because it's just not the right environment.
Because it's not the right environment. And I think in our kind of honest conversation, that can definitely be the case. Sometimes, I mean, it has to be pretty bad for me to lose my optimism or enthusiasm. To be honest, you know what I'm like. But I think sometimes with any kind of change curve or any kind of change that you're making, sometimes in extreme circumstances there comes a point where you have to be like, we're not going to be able to move on this, or like that kind of understanding. But I think generally in cases where you don't have the same kind of level of buy-in, or you have like leadership on a very different path to staff, or like kind of like the way they would see things going, I think it's really important to like understand both perspectives and to understand like kind of where some of the mismatching is. And I think that's where the aspects like storytelling and narrative come in so strongly. And I think being able to like work with your leadership to understand where there might be some differentiation from like staff and like staff's way of kind of thinking, but helping them to like kind of go about addressing that in their own narrative and their own kind of roles as leadership to help to kind of start to build that kind of journey. And so I think one aspect of it is certainly like storytelling, communication, getting that right, getting like leadership in a space and supported so that they're able to deliver that to the organization effectively. But I think another part is everybody, especially in local government, and I'll speak for local government in this,
All of it.
all of local government
Right
here. What a claim.
I am England.
I am local authorities personified. Sometimes the passion feels like that. But, I think it's that, we're there to serve residents. And if you genuinely, when I look at our staff survey results or staff survey results across different local authorities, that is the driving force. People are not there for the glamorous life. They're not there for imagine we're going to get on a flight to, the Caribbean this week. For no,
probably not.
People are there because they care about changing people's lives. And that is already a collective starting point that we have. And that's always like something that I think can be built upon, because even if you have different ways about going about achieving that or different paths to get to there, that is the end goal that we all want to get to. So I think capturing that as part of like the narrative and the storytelling is really important. And then I think if the storytelling and the narrative and like that kind of motivation piece are not working so well, which you can get to the point of that, I think you then have to come in with like the different kind of intrinsic, extrinsic motivators and start to understand how can we start to make these like the kind of norms in the organization and really kind of embed them through the organization. And that's when you can bring in things like we've looked at before, but like the kind of like more radical change makers piece, and like really getting those people who can drive change in the organization on board with the vision, because you've got some key people on board to help drive that, that's when you can start to really make that impact.
I think if I were to distill those into 3 points, I think the three things that I would say from it is that the first one you said, first step is to kind of make a bit of an inventory, right? Kind of assess what the lay of the land is and what people are, what tracks they're on, right?
Yeah.
The second one was then tap into that collective kind of motivator point, right? And then if people are not in that collective motivator point, then identify the internal, intrinsic, and extrinsic motivations, right? So what drives people to do something? Because I think a lot of people are working in jobs, and some are in the public sector and some are not, right? There's a lot of people who feel like in their jobs are just like, I'm just here to make a paycheck.
Yeah.
Right? And you're like, okay, I get that. If that's what you want, that's fine, right? Like, I'm not here to judge that. I'm here to say you don't have to have only that, right? And I think you probably have experienced that, like, caring about your job is actually quite stressful. It's because you actually want to solve things. You want to help people. You want to make a difference. When you care, it's potentially more. It's like the highs and lows. It's like in a relationship. The more you give, the more dynamic that relationship can be. It can be highs and lows. And that's the same thing with work, that if you give so much, then you can be hurt emotionally and be rewarded emotionally, right? And it's a really tricky one to navigate those motivators for people, because some people they're just like, I don't see the point in it. But I think those 3 steps that you're just talking about are really useful and helpful for people to think about, how can I apply change in my job, right? Because it doesn't have to be big, right? You can always start small and say, oh, I just want to do this team lunch, right?
Yeah.
Right? And that's it, right? Like, make your world better just so that people have a vibe, right? So that you're not coming to work and be like
Exactly.
giving up, right? Because no one wants that. No one wants to be a drone.
No, exactly. And I think creating like kind of, I think those small steps are so important. I think an underlying theme through like all of them as well is that kind of like the leadership piece, which I do think is fundamental, and like the kind of narrative and the storytelling and having a collective vision. But I think if you're thinking on like a smaller scale than like organizationally, if you're thinking about culture of like teams or departments or directorates, that things like the team lunches, the kind of smaller steps, and where I've seen change done really effectively, and like especially in terms of kind of like behaviors, values, like norms, that kind of thing, is like when you give people the opportunity to have an open space where they can kind of air their views, or like you take the time to individually like kind of, sometimes you can't do that because it's really big, but you give people the opportunity to air some of their feelings in whatever way feels safe for the space, but then you you move on from that and you get people to really think about that. You get people together to really think about that kind of collective vision and to think about how that can come together to kind of do that. And I think when you've got everyone on the same page and like you've given people the opportunity, I always say you have to give people the opportunity to like blow off some steam, but you don't want to give them too much time. It's got to be you've had your time now.
Just win.
That's there.
Yeah. You can't just sit there and complain all the time. You have to go somewhere.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You can have 5 minutes of whinging and then we're like moving on. No, I normally give them a bit more than that.
That's
but it's
reasonable.
like, you give people that space to air how they've been feeling and like, so they feel as though they've had that kind of opportunity. But then you switch the narrative around and you get people to focus on like the future and how do we like move towards that. And then you start by doing those small actions, like you said, you go for a team lunch or, you have someone who like volunteers to feed back into like the way in which it's working to like senior leadership, and like you start to like create some of those little things. And I think some of the kind of reading we've done on our courses that really, there's like some really interesting examples of people doing things like wearing different color socks or like, whatever that might look like. But I think that's absolutely right. And it's like, change takes time. You don't get change overnight. Everyone wishes, everyone wishes that, you were like, this is how I want it to be tomorrow, snap, here we are. So those of us who are interested in like actual impact, not output, to a certain extent outcomes, yes, but like the actual impact, you have to accept you've got to be in it for the long haul. And that means the taking it slowly, doing it step by step, evaluating how that change is going. Is it working? Do we need to iterate this? What does that look like? And really kind of doing it over time. But it'll be worth it when you start to feel that difference.
Yeah, I think I very much buy into the change takes so much time.
Yeah.
Right. There is not an appreciation for what is really required of people to make behavior change. Right. People always oversimplify like, oh, people are going to use my app and it's going to be good. And you're like, dog, who's going to even know your app exists? Right. Like,
Yeah.
no one cares. Like, no, unfortunately, right? Like, it's not that people are really mean. It's just people have so much information flooded onto them that it's really hard to imagine, like, oh, I'm going to do something different. Right? Like, I have apps that, like, are from people that I've worked with who are startups, and are like, I've logged in like once or twice, and I'm like, that's kind of bad. But, I work with these people, but, like, my behavior has to change. That's a lot.
Behavior change is the hard part. And have you seen like the research that says, I mean, this kind of research is always changing. But like that in order for you to develop a habit, it takes like 61 days to develop a habit. And that's like, and that's just something that's within your own life. So say, for example, if you decide that you want to get into the gym, or if you decide that you want to do 10,000 steps a day or whatever, even within your own life, it could take 61 days for that even to start to become a habit.
Yeah.
So if you think about that on like a broader scale, and I think I always think the easy part, well, not the easier part, is like that creating the vision and creating the direction of where you want to go to. I mean, something I'm super interested in, but then the really hard part is the actually changing the norms and the culture and the behavior to achieve that. And that's where the kind of, my work, your work, like the kind of like grit comes in of like the really digging in to change to make that vision come to life.
I resonate so much because there's just like this really gross kind of gritty like consistency that's needed to do even the basic things, right? We don't even have to get like super intellectual, super frou-frou about it, right? It's just like you're saying, like if you want to go to the gym, you got to keep doing it. And that's kind of it. Right? And you're like, oh yeah, I really want to do it, but you have to give yourself that motivating vision, that story. And I think people, I think actually this is something I think about a lot. Like I tell myself superhero stories, right? So I tell myself superhero stories like about myself, right? Because I need to imagine a world where I can do something, right? And I have to keep motivating myself. And sometimes I, I think about like I love like comics, I love superhero stories, I love video games where there's like the main character, right? Like the main character energy. Right? And it's because like I need some of that to kind of motivate myself when I feel really kind of not the best, like, frankly, right? There are moments where you're like, oh, you know what, I'm doing this thing and it really kind of sucks. Right? And I want to keep going because like I want to make a difference. And so I almost have to tell myself a story about like how I'm fighting the odds. And I think a lot of people have stopped telling themselves these stories because it's kind of corny, right? Like, oh, I'm a superhero, right? Like, well, yeah, okay, I can't fly.
Yes. The technology, here we
Yeah.
come.
You know, like I like to think that apply a bit of that grit and resilience, just try to solve a problem and try to keep going more, right? And I think the story is what keeps me going, right? Like it keeps me motivated enough to actually say, all right, I'm going to deal with this not great thing, and I'm just gonna keep pushing through it. Otherwise, I don't know how I would or why I would do it, honestly. And so I think leaders who can tell a story that paint that kind of like superhero kind of vision for an organization or for an individual have like really powerful kind of sway to get people like, that's me. I can do something, right?
Yeah. And I mean, leadership is something I'm absolutely fascinated about. Lots of people are. But I think like leadership in public sector is something I'm really, really interested in. And I think that like emotional intelligence piece in leadership is so important. And how do you understand the people around you and get them to kind of like buy into that vision in a way in which kind of like appeals to their own motivators? Because I think sometimes, you know, there's that traditional view of leadership, that hero leader, you know, the kind of like, I say this, so therefore it'll be done, and kind of, you know, and sometimes you need some of that. And especially in like local authorities, if you're having, the pandemic was a great example of that. You needed that kind of like, you know, top down leadership. But I think really, really powerful leaders are the ones who understand how to motivate people seamlessly in a way. But I also think just generally, and it comes back a bit to what we were talking about before, you have a really clear idea, Andrew, about how you're motivated and what drives you, and like how you you know and like you know what you want to get to, and like, you know, your superhero Andrew who like, you know, is helping people, and like, you know, that's really important to you. I don't know, I don't have any evidence for this, but my kind of hypothesis is that not everyone has such a strong idea of like what their own drivers and motivators are. And I think that it comes back to that piece of like people being so stuck in like business as usual, that time for like self-development or self-reflection doesn't always happen or take place, and people don't always have the support to do that thinking that isn't as natural to them. And so I think part of it comes back to that, you know, if we really want to like drive people and like help them to change, is like what support is there on offer to help them through the change. And I think part of that has to be about them really understanding what it is that drives them and what it is that motivates them. And there are lots of like kind of like easier ways you can do that. You know, I've seen some really like powerful tools, like kind of questionnaires that've got like 21 intrinsic motivators, and like, you know, it helps you to at least have a starting point to think about that. But again, it comes back to that timepiece of people having like, when you're going through change, when it's fast moving, when, you know, everything can feel like a lot because you've got your business as usual and you've got change, like people having the time and the opportunity to understand what drives them and to tap into that narrative. So I think sometimes the people who really are like the energy you want to harness, and the people that, you know, are those more radical change makers, are the ones who understand the vision, understand how they play a role in that vision, and then use that to be their own kind of motivator to help drive that change. And getting people to the same stage, part of it is them understanding their own motivator and the kind of like what role they play in achieving that goal.
I love that. And I think if you can later send me that 21, you know, that intrinsic motivators, I would love that. We will look for this because I want to put it in the links, because I think that would be something that'd be really cool for people to be able to interact with, right? Because I think you're 100% right. People, you know, people don't have the time to think about that, right? Like people who are working insane number of shifts, and like people might be listening to this on a tube or on a car, right? Like they're just going back to back, right? So it's really hard sometimes to create space to think about what drives me. And it can be like your family, right? That's fine, right? That's wonderful, in fact, right? I think people overcomplicate like what doing good is.
Exactly.
Right? And it doesn't have to be crazy, right? You don't have to go work for a charity. You don't have to go join public service. I mean, you could keep doing your job, whatever it is, right? But find the way to be at peace with that, right? And be motivated by that, right? Because that's big, right? That's good enough.
Exactly. And I think it is, and like for every single person, there are different things that are going to motivate you, and no one can tell you that that's right or wrong, what it is that actually kind of motivates you. But it is important to know for yourself what that is. And like, and then I think I always use that for me personally. I always use like what I know motivates me as my benchmark for how I feel about my job or how I feel about like on a day-to-day basis. I'm like, am I, am I aligned with the things that motivate me? Because, ultimately I care about making an impact. That's what I'm driven by. So, part of that is like being able to say, so I've achieved this small step, which is in line with my motivation, which means I'm going towards that kind of creating impact. And like, as you say, finding a way to be at peace with that. For other people, it will be completely different things. And for some people, monetary is like one of the things, and that's okay. Like, all of us have like our different things. But I think if we're really thinking about like kind of driving change and making a difference, understanding what it is that drives you and then using that in a sense to kind of like support that change drive and to think about the kind of like vision and where the organization's getting to is really kind of key.
Yeah, I love that. That's really cool. Okay, the direction now.
Pivot.
What excites you about the future?
Generally, Andrea, local government.
Local government, anything. Just talk about like what are you motivated by right now? Like, where are you going, right?
Yeah.
What are you excited about?
I think, and I know people always say this, but I think it's a very exciting time in local government.
Big moments, guys.
Buzzwords. But yeah, I honestly do, because in like anyone who's familiar with like England and like the government context will know. But for anyone who isn't, in December 2024, there was a white paper that came out about like the direction of local government and what that means for the future, and thinking a bit more about devolution and like funding and kind of what that looks like. As I've already said, things that really excite me are things around leadership, change, bringing like resident voice into like the heart of what we do, and generally, the E word, efficiencies. Like, how do we like deliver, with like, I really love systems, and like, thinking about how you kind of can create the best system possible to deliver for residents, and like using like leadership and motivation through that. And the context that we're going into in local government, we'll see where we end up getting to, because obviously that was a white paper and we've had lots of back and forth.
Paper versus reality as well.
Paper versus reality, how that's going to look. But it's certainly a context of change in local government, and like, the government have like spoken about, that kind of like efficiencies piece in local government and like streamlining it. How do we make sure that it's working really well? And I guess for me that's super exciting, because it's the, and not just in local government. I'm really interested in like the NHS, in like civil service, in like central government, of like, we've got some brilliant work in like the public sector, but how do we take some of that brilliant work and make it best practice? How do we take the things that aren't working so well and drive that? And I also think, I feel strongly about this, but the kind of like that partnership working, for so long, one of the things, even when we were like kind of joking before, it's true, Tower Hamlets here, Southwark is here, like, central government's here, like, NHS is here, and like, and there's so much kind of like siloed working, and sometimes we're great and we share best practice across, sometimes we share data across, sometimes it can be very hard to share data across different areas. But I think moving forwards, there's going to be a really strong push and direction of like, how across the public sector do we work better together, because we all have the same, fundamentally we all have the same goal. We have different roles to play in that, but we have the same goal. And like, they're the two things that really excite me, because I think that it's great to like make those efficiencies on the local level and like in individual councils and the NHS and all those things, and create like systems that work really well for people. That fascinates me in of itself. But then when I think about the kind of like broader picture, and like on a whole public sector, those kind of systems and how we could make them work really well, that's where I'm like, wow, that would be great.
No, it's really cool. I think it's an interesting time as well. And I think your point about like, and so for context for people who don't know about how local government works in the UK, because there's pretty much just local government and then pretty much just national government, there is not like this state construct, right? A lot of responsibility used to be at the central government, national government, and then local government had like this change in like what their scope of responsibility was, right? So with devolution came, that meant that national government was to start to pass back responsibilities to local government. And so now we're in this world where all these local governments have all these new responsibilities, a really different kind of landscape of funding as well. And they're trying to figure out how do we join things up, because at the big level it didn't work very well. And then at the local level, now we have to reimagine right, what the future looks like. And so there's this huge opportunity really to try to be innovative and change management people like yourselves.
And I do think it's just so exciting. And like when you think about our joined up, like if we could get the systems working really well across like, you know, local government, NHS and all those things, the difference that would make in terms of generally funding, economy, and you know, from a money perspective, but also just from a like experience of people who use that, it was just would just be, you know, phenomenal. But I think to your point about like this the scope of local government changing, absolutely, and we've definitely seen that. But I think for me, a real kind of point in time was like when the pandemic kind of hit, and you know, during that time period, the government gave a lot more responsibility to local government than there had kind of almost previously been. And like look at things like test and trace. You know, there was quite a view across the country of like nationally how it was working or not working, as the case may be. But then when they put it into like a local, you know, context and setting, you know, it worked much better. And I think that was the pandemic was a really interesting time of seeing like how
things could work.
And how if local authority had more power, what that would kind of be like and look like. And I do think that relationship between local government and central government is really key, because you know the laws are some of the things that are the most important to us in local authority. We always have to work within our statutory duties and all kind of those things, and like that's incredibly important. But sometimes, you know, those laws can feel quite frustrating. You know, like take for example housing. You know, in order to be classed as homeless, you have to have been homeless in the borough, like to be eligible for housing because you're homeless. You have to have been homeless in the borough for like 6 months.
Wow.
In the same borough.
Wow.
You know?
And they're a very transient community, so they're moving around a lot.
Exactly. Do you know where the borough lines are? I only see it when I like look at the labels on the road signs.
Yeah, I barely notice.
And I'm a bit of a geek for this, you know. So I'm like, ooh, Southwark, ooh, Lambeth, ooh. Now I'm crossing.
What a time to be alive!
I'm like, here's the road divide, and then I'm like, oh, I wonder if one half of the street is Lewisham and one half of the street is Southwark, and then who owns the road? Is it TFL to throw in another party? But genuinely, you know, there's like, you know. Genuinely though, there are some things where you're like, we want to make change happen, we want to do things differently, and like we could do it better if like the law wasn't so restricted. But at the same time, you also want the objectivity of the law to kind of hold you to account. But I think that I think that part's not explored enough about that kind of relationship between like all of local government would probably be termed as more like frontline delivery and like kind of like the central government aspect. And yes, there's some campaigning back and forth, you know, we might lobby for things like for changes and that kind of thing. But I think that there's a real opportunity for an open dialogue about, and like some, as I was saying, some of that systems mapping and like showing the journeys of people who like are impacted by these kind of things and like taking that back.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. It's a really tricky one because there's just so much. There's so much to be done. I'm going to give you a little thing that I was thinking about while you're talking. I realized that a lot of people don't necessarily think of themselves as system thinkers, but there's actually multiple. There's like this. So I'm not sure how much you know about the nerd world, but in computer games, there's these whole video games that are designed around building systems. Right? There's literally games that are called like Factorio, Satisfactory, and like all you do is you build this giant system. Right?
Wow.
And it's literally like factory conveyor belts, machines pumping out resources, and you're like, this is my system, right? And the people who play these games I've seen some incredible things out there. And you're like, who would have thought that the nerds who are playing the games that are against like this, right? Me.
Right? Of course.
And they're like, I've got a wonderful factory. Look at this factory. It's amazing. It's the best factory ever.
It works perfectly because obviously Andrew's designed
I've designed it. It's a massive factory.
Nothing else.
And like that whole process, like it makes me realize that a lot of people who who can apply that kind of skill to solving issues like what you've just described, right? Because, and I think we need more people like that who are thinking and playing these big games and be willing to say, I'm gonna apply that skill to working between national government and local government, because we need more people who think like that.
No, I agree, and systems thinking isn't spoken about very much. And I must say, before I worked in a systems thinking team, you know, I hadn't heard of the term systems
I
thinking.
think it just feels very like a
Yeah.
fruit for those, like, you know,
Yeah.
because you're like, oh, systems thinking. You're like, okay, you're like, get out of here,
I know.
right?
For some people like me who do not speak in an academic way ever, as you can see from
No,
this
you're perfect.
conversation, you know, things like that, I'm like, well, that feels like a bit of a barrier. What does that even mean? But I always, when I'm like talking about like systems thinking or the way that it works, I always say, are you frustrated with the way that it works, the world works, your job works, however works? Because if you're frustrated about those things and you can think of ways to do it better, then you're a systems thinker.
Yeah, that's it, right? Simple as. I love that. That's really good.
Because, you know, that is essentially, that's what it is. It's like, where are things not working, and how can we change
That's great.
the system?
I like that a lot.
Yeah.
I think more people need to think like that and use those simple words and framing, right?
Yeah.
Because it's not about this like crazy language. That's unnecessary. Right? I mean, like it's what's used in, I guess, the people who made it up, right? And it's great, but I think it could feel like barriers sometimes.
Sorry to our Cambridge professors.
I'm not sorry.
To clarify for the record, Andrew is not sorry.
Yeah, I just want to make sure we're very clear. I have no apologies. I regret that.
But it's true, because I don't know, long words and stuff isn't very me, and I think that comes from the local government context of the fact that you know, like people understanding, and the art of communication is them understanding you, and using big words
is not necessary.
No,
Yeah.
no. I actually do think that's important in the change piece as well. Like the way that you like choose to like write how you're, or like to create that narrative, and like the language that you choose is so important. And I think actually we don't talk about language enough, because if people don't have a shared language or like a shared understanding of what you're talking about, then you're automatically going to start off in different places.
Yes, because I feel like that's a lot of the political spectrum, right?
It's true.
A lot of people describe issues in one way, and then another person describes it another way. They're talking about the same issue, right? Like, for instance, you know, we think about like people's jobs, right? Like maybe a more progressive liberal way to be like, well, job insecurity, right? And like, you know, workers' rights. But then you have a guy who's just saying, you know what, I've lost my job because they've outsourced my job to another country. They're both talking about the same issue, right? That fundamentally we've ignored the person at the core of the job.
Yeah.
But we're using different language to talk about it, and we've ignored the person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's something that we should have spoken about before, but it's true. Like whenever you're going through a period of change, or like you're creating that, ensuring that you've got a really clear, you know, this is what, when we're talking about this is what this means.
Yeah.
It's just so fundamental.
Yeah.
Or you do start to get that kind of like cross wires, and that's can stop people from buying in.
Oh yeah, very quickly.
Yeah.
Frustrating.
Yeah.
Leaves me distressed about politics, because I feel like we need more common language. But that's for another time. Last question for you. It's kind of crazy that we've gotten through that much time already. Actually, we've like flown. What would you say is one thing a person can do to try to make their work more meaningful, more rewarding, and to make them feel like they're doing something good? Like if you were to just put it in like a simple term, maybe just from your own experience, for what you do for yourself, what do you see other people doing? Love to hear that.
Oh, that's a good question.
Take your time, there's no rush.
Says the Virgo pulsing in the background, looking at the time.
We have to go.
We have to go.
We have plenty of time. All that's up next is lunch.
Oh, it is urgent then. Honestly, I think, like we were talking before about like kind of motivation and what drives you.
Yeah.
It's like looking in your own world about like the things that you really enjoy. And I always get people to think about, if I'm like doing any coaching or like mentoring or that kind of thing, what are the things in your job that you really enjoy? What are the things that get you out of bed, and what are the things that you don't enjoy as much? And like everyone has some things that they don't enjoy as much that they just have to do as part of their job, unfortunately. True. But like the things that like where you see that real impact, and where, you know, what are the things that make you kind of be like, wow, that's so cool, that's like exciting, and like capturing those moments, and like I also always advise people to like write them down.
Yeah.
Those things that you've like really enjoyed, or the things that you've kind of, you felt like you've been able to make a kind of real impact, or whatever it might be that drives you, like writing those down and like having a record of them so you can like look through them. But I also think that it's really important to like have an honest conversation with yourself, because work is so much of our time and so much of our like kind of days and lives, and I just think it's so important to do something that you enjoy. And that's why I think, if you're not enjoying it, you don't have to stay there. No one's chained you there. Like, you can think about your skills, you can think about what you can offer, and like you can like look for other roles to work in. And that's something that we actually do quite well in like local authorities, is encouraging people. Well, maybe you've done quite a lot of time here, but you've got the skills, and like you've still got that intrinsic driver of like making change happen for people, and like caring for residents, and like wanting to change people's lives. That's your driver. So have you thought about trying like this part? Like, there's so many other things, but I think it's really thinking about what matters to you, and then finding that in your kind of day-to-day role, and using that as like your burning light. But being honest with yourself, if the light's going out, why are you still there?
Yeah. Amen to that.
Yeah, because essentially then you will start to become some of the barriers for making change happen, because you start to become one of the voices being like, no,
Yeah.
And I think especially if you're a change maker and someone who's interested in that, you become the blocker to what you're trying to create. So I think, it's okay to like switch around. It's okay to like go somewhere, come back, and like, develop yourself. But I also think that, the grass isn't always greener.
Sure.
So just having a really honest, am I getting what I need, and am I able to kind of deliver what I would like to as part of this?
Amen to that. I think taking those risks and taking the time to reflect are fundamentally at the core of everything. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for taking the time for sharing. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
It's very nice to be asked.
It's great. I'm glad that we got to do this in person, because then we got a beautiful sky. Actually, it was really gray yesterday, lots of clouds, and I get to see you in person. So it's wonderful.